guys, Veronica here. So today is the day you've all been waiting for, I know, because today is the day we're finally going to plant these tomatoes that have been in pots since I got here. Actually, since like December, January. So yeah, they're ready to go in the ground. It is warm enough, the soil is warm enough. I already have a few that are planted on this row, but I had a few more to go, and I decided that it might be helpful to show you how I plant tomatoes. Now, whether or not you have gophers and are using root cages, the same rules will apply. You just won't have to do the step of building a cage. Now, I have built these again out of hardware cloth, as I've mentioned in a previous video, and I basically just cut the hardware cloth in a way that the sharp points are sticking out, and then fold them under the next panel to create a tube. This one has a little better shape than my envelopes normally do. I was playing with a different method, but you can buy root cages. It's just that they're, for like the gallon sizes, you start getting into that like $8 to $10 a pop situation, and I'm not doing that. So this costs like $1 to make. It's worth the effort. But anyway, these tomatoes are going in the ground today because, as you can see, we've got flowers, we've got fruit. There's a lot on here that I really don't want before it's actually in the ground. So first step is we're going to clean this tomato up, and then we're going to get it planted. Now, as you can see here next to me, I have pre-dug a hole so that it is not me rambling and digging for like 5 to 10 minutes, trying to, you know, figure out the depth and whatnot. So you're welcome. But what I'm going to do is cut this guy off of his support. When he was a little baby tomato, when he first moved into this container, when I first got here like 2 months ago now, he needed a little support. And now he still needs a little support, but he's got a nice big thick stem there, and that's going to help him out a lot. Now you'll notice, and I'll give you the close-up on this as well, but there's little bumps here on the stem. And so part of the reason that this basket is so tall is not because I'm covering a ton of foliage, but what I'm going to do is plant this guy a lot deeper than he's currently planted. And going back to the bumps on the stem, the reason that I'm doing this is because tomatoes have this special function. If you've watched a previous video that I made on potting up tomatoes, they have this really special superpower, really, of creating roots anywhere that their main stem touches soil or has enough humidity to feel like it's in proximity of soil. Maybe it's covered by some mulch. So they're called adventitious roots, and they basically will form roots anywhere that it's touching the soil. So we're going to use that to our advantage. We are going to plant it really nice and deep in order to get as many roots as we can growing all along the stem. And what that's going to do is you're going to have to water a little bit less when the summertime comes and it gets really hot. You can water them deeper and less frequently, I suppose, is what I'm getting at there. And also, they're going to have a little less struggle supporting themselves in terms of staying upright. So all of these things are great. We want a really big, deep, dynamic root system going on these guys because they are a long season plant and they are very heavy feeders. And so the more roots out in the soil to get all of the things they need, the better. Now, sometimes you'll get a plant from a nursery. It probably won't look like this, hopefully, unless it's a lot later in the season. But sometimes you'll get like a really nice kind of tall tomato plant. And I still recommend doing this with the nursery plants. If you have a little seedling at home and it's not very tall and you want to plant it out already, maybe don't bury it as deep. But if you have one that's, you know, sort of leggy and lanky like this, or maybe, you know, anywhere in like the 8 inches to a foot range, what I'll basically do is bury it down to like 2/3 to 3/4 of that plant with either 1/4 to 1/3 sticking out the top. So you kind of eyeball it. I like to leave a couple inches above the soil line. But what I'm going to do right now is go through and cut off basically anything that's going to be below the soil line, as well as any suckers, any flowers, and any fruit. Now, it's a little heartbreaking because it got this far, and there's a lot of flowers on this guy, but I guarantee you, unless you have like a super, super short, like Montana, Wyoming, cold climate season, where you have 100 days or less of growing season, then definitely, you know, do this part of the process because it will benefit you in the long run. So I'm going to cut off just like all of these little bits of suckers, all the little extra branches here, and basically go up to where it's going to be buried to, which is probably about there. I can check it against the cage and just kind of put like the base of it next to this cage. You could also drop it in the hole if you have your hole dug. And so see, that is right about to where it's going to be buried in this. So then above that line, I'm just going to come in here. You can see that. Yeah. Like pop out flowers and do it with the pruners actually. Here we go. Pop out flowers. We're going to pop out any suckers. That's the little bits of vine that are creating that 45-degree angle between a leaf and stem. And you can see I have all of these little tomatoes already growing on this, but that's okay. This is actually a really prolific variety. So it's a plum tomato that I picked up in Italy several years ago from the farmer's market. And I just really loved it and talked to the farmers a little bit about it and decided that it was one that I wanted to try and keep around and grow more of. So that's hard. There we go. Okay. I'm trying not to cut off like this main growth node, but also get the flowers out. So now that I've got that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this root cage. I have in front of me here a couple of buckets as well as a watering can. Highly recommend just having a workstation set up as you get going. So this bucket is compost and some really decomposed wood fines from around the yard, digging under the mulch piles and getting like that really rich dark stuff that's out of there. I walked it over to a hose spigot before I started, and just like seed starting, just like you're getting that medium, nice and wet for seed starting, I also do that with anything I'm adding to a planting hole. I highly recommend, if you haven't had rain or haven't been watering frequently, to really water the spot that you've dug. You don't want anything to be more dry than anything else. If anything else, if like the driest thing maybe is like your seedling pot, but everything typically like go for well watered, because there's two things that can happen there if you don't, water the hole, water your planting medium or amending medium, and water your seedling. Two things can happen. One, you could potentially have the surrounding soil that is surrounding your seedling in that hole kind of wick the moisture away from the root zone, which is definitely something you don't want, because that's going to stress the plant out more than it's already stressed, in a new environment. And two, if it's a really dry medium, especially if you are dealing with something where it's like this sort of sandy loam like we have here, there's a lot of sand, a lot of clay, like you might actually create a hydrophobic layer somewhere down in the bottom because it was never adequately moist to begin with. So just avoid that completely. Like all that is to say is just make sure that everything is adequately moist as you begin, so that you don't create more problems for yourself than you need. Now the other thing I do is I plant, as you can see it's kind of getting dark here. I like to plant right before sunset. I think that it gives the plant a couple extra hours to sort of settle in, kind of establish itself with the microbes in the soil and whatnot, and just kind of chill out for a minute. If you're doing it in the morning or the middle of the day, there's all of these stressors in terms of like heat and humidity and sun and all of that. So just avoid stressing your plant as much as possible. You're already chopping off a bunch of leaves and flowers and fruit, and it's already kind of confused. So we're going to get it in its new home as nicely as we can. So another thing that is good as far as getting this, whatever your amending medium is, adequately moist, is that it doesn't completely fall through if you're using a cage, whereas if it's dry, like this basically just works as a screen because it is. So I put a little bit in the bottom, not too much, because again, I'm planting this guy pretty deep, and then you can see like he's ready to go. I can't believe these were like such little tender babies when I first started them, and I wasn't sure they were going to make it, and now here we are in May, and they're just cranking along. So you can see I get this root ball. I probably maybe even put a little too much compost down there. I'm gonna squish a little through. But like I get that root ball as deep into this cage as I can. Then all of this is gonna be filled with soil. And then all of these little bumps, and even bumps that haven't formed yet along the stem, are gonna become roots. So we'll just have this like foot and a half column of roots instead of, the 8 inches or so that it had before. So we're doubling our root zone, which is going to really support our plant. Now you may have noticed, I don't know if you can actually see it in there, but maybe in the digging part of the video, that I kind of separated out my, what I pulled from the soil here when I was digging this hole. And so I like to keep And you'll kind of get a feel for this as you garden more. Like, I like to keep the top portion, all of like the really nice decomposed topsoil, stuff that I've been building, stuff that I've been poking around, amending, compost and whatnot, off to one side. And then at some point you start to hit these like lower layers, especially when you're digging a hole this deep. And so those lower layers, that really like fine, sandy, maybe clay, some oxidation, a few rocks, that sort of thing, off to the other side. And that way you can sort of blend it. And if you have enough nice soil to fill the hole with, enough compost or whatever, then you can go straight that. You can blend some of the sandy stuff into that as you fill it back in, so that you're starting to create these really nice pockets of soil throughout your yard. It's not just to support this plant in this particular season, but also to support what goes in there next and after that and after that. So really thinking further down the line in terms of how this soil works out. And so I basically, you can't really see it, but I took a handful of the compost with a handful or two of the sandy stuff. And so I mixed those together, maybe a little bit of the top stuff, and you're just blending as you're putting it back in the hole, so that you really are creating a better support system for the plant that's in this hole. So now I'll just do that with basically all the rest of the compost that I have in here. You'll see that I kind of cut back the cover crops around this space as well. Now, I do leave the cover crops in for as long as possible. And I do this, one, because they're not going to seed yet, so they're not at like maximum availability to the soil, so to speak, as far as like whatever nutrients that they're presenting. But also, I find that wildlife kind of tests the cover crops at some point, and then they don't really come back to them. So if you have a blank slate and a couple of tomatoes sticking up, then the odds of something coming in and like munching the tomatoes are pretty high. But if the tomatoes are surrounded by mustard and brassicas, like turnips and radishes and beans and grasses and like just a wide variety of things that don't taste good to whatever's nibbled it before, then it's probably not gonna go digging through it, because it goes, oh, this is the same stuff, I already tasted it and I don't like it. So I've had very little like grazing pressure, with the exception of the ones at the very end, because something wandered in here at some point and took a nibble off of a few. But for the most part, I don't see massive losses, and I do credit that to having so many brassicas, so much mustard and turnip, and all of these really bitter, strong plants that most things don't like to eat. So highly recommended, all of that, if you're having trouble with both insect and herbivore pressure. Like, I can see it being a really big benefit. So you'll kind of see I've surrounded this cage now with a little bit of like a soil volcano. And then what I'm going to do is, since we are establishing it in a new place and stressing it out a little by pruning, I have a watering can here that has diluted seaweed solution in it. It's just a very basic, like, bottled seaweed product, but I use that to kind of establish my plants. I didn't have any of like the other stuff that I typically mix into my compost. I'm all out of everything right now, but using what I have. And so there's a lot of stuff that you can feed tomatoes. I mean, I know people who put a whole fish head at the bottom of the hole, people who will like toast and grind eggshells. There's tons of Korean natural farming stuff. So dig into it if you've had trouble with them in the past, just as far as like what you're going to feed them. I'm going to be doing a lot of top dressing here because I didn't really have much prepared. So, but they got to get in the ground. And so it's like, well, I have compost in one spot that's good, and working on the soil in this spot to be good. So we're going to cross our fingers and address problems as they pop up, and maybe that's more helpful anyway, right? So I'll get this guy watered in really well, make sure that it's almost like a little muddy, to be honest. And then I just let it all kind of sink in, because I don't know how dry the soil in this direction is. I know the soil in the middle is good, but like as we move towards the path, I haven't dug too far in this direction. And so I'm just going to err on the side of caution and make sure that it is plenty wet, and then give it a few days to chill out. If you live in a really wet or cold climate, you might want to be a little more careful about the watering. But if you're somewhere warm or dry, like, it should be fine. And from there, what I do is I have another bucket here. This bucket just has mulch, and I go straight into the mulching part of this because I don't see the point of waiting until it gets hot to mulch it. This helps to keep the cover crops from encroaching too quickly on it. And also it seems to help to keep the weeds down. So if we can prevent, you know, a little bit extra work, why not? So it's pretty easy to just grab a bucket of mulch, especially if you have wood chips all over your yard like we do here. But just grab, you know, keep a couple bags or buckets or a pile of mulch somewhere in the corner, and then just once your main plants are in, dropping some mulch on it is really going to save you in terms of watering. I've heard some people have issues with slugs with mulch. I haven't really noticed that here. I mean, obviously, like you can see, we got those little baby slugs here, and so we get Swiss cheesed on everything. But these are cover crops, and most of these I'm cooking, and it doesn't matter if they have holes because it gets cooked down to like melted greens anyway. So yeah, just kind of, you know, use your best sort of like problem solving judgment there. And if you have issues with slugs or whatever, and it's because they're hiding under the mulch, then, you know, maybe find ways to change it up. Like don't, you know, keep them soggy at night, and definitely water in the morning, as we've pointed out before. So that's pretty much it for how I plant a tomato. As you can see, once again, it is maybe like a third of it is sticking above ground, and then like 2/3 of it is below ground, and kind of training it up a trellis here in the very near future as soon as all of these adventitious roots get out and get going. So anyway, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you like what you see, hit that subscribe button, ding that bell, don't miss a single episode, and follow me on Instagram at Flavor Kit for all of this sort of stuff and more. There's always some wacky gardening adventure going on over there. Lots of baby plants and lots of funny chicken things. So yeah, like, subscribe, Instagram, and until next time, happy gardening.